Whoa, dude! Think about the children! The Bible is immoral because it promotes killing children! Have you thought that through? I mean, really thought about the implications of what you're saying? You're immoral! Think about the children! Okay, if that's what you want to do, but today we are going to talk about the Bible and infanticide on this episode of Ancient Egypt and the Bible. It is a common atheist polemic to state that the Bible and its God are immoral because there are commands in the text to kill children. Prima facie, this is an argument from emotion more than a properly constructed moral argument. But for the sake of this video, we will steelman the argument and then analyze it. As a steelman, the argument goes thusly. The Bible is an authority of supreme moral guidance. And yet, in places, the God of the Bible commands the killing of Midianite male children, for example, Numbers 31:7. We know that children are innocent, and therefore, the killing of children is inherently immoral. And therefore, the God of the Bible is inherently immoral, so, as a result, is the Bible. And that's the steelman argument in a nutshell. Now, we should be cautious to attempt to judge the people of the past by what we consider moral today. Moral thinking has changed radically over time. And in the past, morality was often subsumed by pragmatism. In prehistoric caveman culture, the first pacifists were also the first to be killed by those who were not pacifists. Morality, as we have it today, is the result of 2,000 years of Christian moral reflection and theology. So, to rag on the Bible for being immoral because there's infanticide recorded in it is to take that moral reflection, of which atheism misappropriates, and weaponize it against its source. This is a presentist fallacy, i.e., what we have today is necessarily the ideal for all history. This also smacks of a kind of cultural superiority, a construct for which the skeptic was never responsible for developing in the first place. So with that said, we must judge historical events by their circumstances. During the late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, Israel was a clan-based society. Clan-based societies often carry forward intergenerational vendettas. So if someone's parents were killed, their male children were bound to avenge their parents. We don't only see this in Israelite society, but in other clan-based societies, like, for example, in the Japanese society. We see in the Japanese tale the Heike Monogatari, where Prince Ushikawa pledges to avenge his slain father and vows to exterminate the Heike clan. This kind of escalation was commonplace in clan-based society. As such, the cycle of violence of clans wiping each other out didn't end unless the male children were killed with the parents. However, it might be said that God had the power to kill the guilty parents and leave the children unscathed. And let's further grant that the act of killing the children was immoral, and the historical circumstances were not a sufficient justification. What would happen in some of these circumstances if the children were not killed? Let's take Sodom and Gomorrah as the hypothetical that the entire city was not destroyed with fire, and only the parents, i.e. the guilty, were killed. And let's say that they were killed not by fire, but in the same way that the angel of death killed the firstborn during the Passover. So they're just struck dead, in the streets. In this hypothetical, all the parents are struck dead. The city remains intact, and only the children are spared. What would such a scenario look like? And what would the results be? First, there's no one left to take care of the children. There's no such thing as a Canaanite orphanage. There's no one to feed the children, to grow the crops, protect, clothe, and care for the children. Most of the children would die from starvation and neglect. A few individuals might even resort to cannibalism when the food runs out. Second, who's going to bury the bodies of the dead? Without adults to bury the dead, rodents, disease, and plague would run rampant through the cities. Many children would die as a result from the lack of post-mortem sanitation. Third, other cities surrounding Sodom and Gomorrah would loot the cities and randomly kill or enslave the surviving children that had survived. It would have been a bleak future for the children that were spared. By only killing the guilty parents, the children would still experience dire consequences. That's the point. Even if the children had not been killed, deeply negative consequences cannot be avoided. By stating that killing the children is immoral, the critic is suggesting that punishment for sin is only moral when the consequences only affect the guilty. And emotionally, that's how we would want the world to be. But that's not how reality works. The suggestion that there can be punishment without consequences is impossible in this world. There is no private sin and no such thing as sin without consequences. And there's a difference between guilt and consequences. When a father of a family is convicted of murder by a court of law today, the family, who may have no knowledge of the crime, still experiences consequences. The family loses their income, while the father serves time in prison. The family's reputation is soiled in the community. They will lose their home in order to pay for dad's legal fees. They may even have to move to another state and change their names to start over. And even the taxpayer must pay through their taxes for the punishment of the father. Many people not involved directly in the crime end up suffering the consequences. They are not guilty. They are the collateral victims of the father's evil actions. The judges who convict criminals of crimes are not morally at fault for the consequences that befall the collateral victims. The blame solely rests upon the guilty perpetrators of the crime for the unintended consequences of their crimes. Now, there are two potential rejoinders to this. The first being that God is perfect, and a perfect judge only visits punishment on the wicked. And by punishing the wicked in a way that creates consequences for the innocent, this creates situational evil if the innocent parties are affected by his judgment. Now, this is a lot weaker claim than the previous injustice claim. It doesn't deny that God can or is allowed to act with justice, but it attacks God's omnipotence and his omnibenevolence by saying he cannot judge without creating situational evil. Therefore, he cannot be all good, or he acts in a way where he cannot only punish the guilty. Now, for those not familiar with the term situational evil, it is the idea that bad or less desirable things can happen as a result of circumstances. It's like when two people board an airplane and end up in the same row, and both want the window seat. The circumstances preclude both people having the window seat because there is only one window seat. However, if we apply this to the consequences of a crime, this becomes a naturalistic fallacy. It deduces what ought to be, quote, that only the evil receive the consequences, end quote, from the is condition, quote, that innocents also receive consequences from the actions of evil people, end quote, and claims that a good God ensures that only the wicked receive consequences. But again, as people act in groups, our condition is not structured that way. Free will actions have both direct and indirect consequences on other people. And if God were to respect free will, he doesn't protect the evil men from the consequences, whether direct or indirect. The other potential rejoinder is that the wrongdoer did not intend to cause indirect consequences, so he is not guilty and should not receive those consequences because he didn't have an evil mind. He did not intend to cause any harm. However, the same could be said of intoxicated drivers who injure people or damage property. Even though no drunk driver sets out to kill someone, he had the responsibility of getting drunk and getting behind the wheel. So, the actions leading up to his decisions to A, drink, and then B, drive a vehicle rest with him. Therefore, the responsibility and the guilt rests with the person doing the evil deed, even if he did not intend for bad things to happen to other innocent parties. So, even if the children were killed at Sodom with the parents, or the male children of the clan-based Midianites were commanded to be put to the sword, the guilt for the deaths of the children doesn't rest with God, but with the men who acted with evil intent. And this is why we need to think, really think about the children. Because if we really think about this, the moral responsibility doesn't rest with God. Nor can moral responsibility be ameliorated using appeals to emotion. Ultimately, the moral responsibility rests with the actions of men. So anyway, I want to thank you for watching today. We hope you learned something, and we'll see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.